Welcome to this webinar about website accessibility by the C Collective. Just a few words of introductions. My name is Marie. I'm the founder of the C Collective. And Mark, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Mark, also from the C Collective. I look after service design and user experience design and research.
Thanks, Mark. We're a boutique consultancy based in the UK, and we're all about scaling sustainable solutions through outstanding user experience. And the services that we provide range from strategy and user research, really understanding what the business needs, its markets and the users, user-centered design, so creating, testing, optimizing products, services, and the end-to-end user experience. We can also help with implementation support, so helping you build your products and all the underlying business processes that need to happen. And we also do a bit of training, just like today. We share our knowledge and experience on the topics of user experience, design thinking, comms, pitching, and content and marketing as well. So let's crack on the topic of accessibility. So I guess you might all have some different levels of understanding of this topic, but let's go back to the basics. So accessibility has different variations in terms of meaning. So it's about being able to be reached or entered, especially if you talk about a physical space. It's being easy to obtain or to use, and it's also being easy to understand and appreciate. So it's pretty straightforward, but worth a reminder. So if we frame that into our context of sustainable brands, people and planet friendly brands, it's very important to frame accessibility as an inclusion challenge. And this is why there are accessibility standards for different industries, and the digital industry and digital experience is also part of this accessibility standards. Okay, Mark, I think there's people in the lobby. If you can admit them for me.
Yeah,
right.
all okay.
Welcome to the new joiners. So this is where we know that it's not necessarily a big priority, website accessibility, but we strongly believe that if you're in your sustainable brands or inspiring sustainable brands, you're about people and planet. So you really need to make sure that you cater for most of your user needs. And the reality is, if we look at the big, the big figures of accessibility and disability, there are 1 billion people who live with a disability today, and that's 15% of the global population. And if we look at things like, blind people or visually impaired people, it's 4% of the population. So it's not insignificant. And if you, for instance, are targeting a more an older audience because you're I don't know, offering some care, or for instance, if you're just looking to attract investors, the chances they're going to be 50 plus. So the level of disabilities might be higher in that context. We've already worked with founders who had some of the investors using screen readers, so they were particularly aware of the necessity to make sure their website had high accessibility standards. So I'll leave the floor to Mark to cover how also those disabilities can take different shapes and also be situational.
Hi, yes, thank you. So it's actually really interesting because that quote previously said 1 billion people around the world live with some sort of disability, 1 billion people, but actually it's much more than that, because as you can see here by this graphic here, it's not just what we would consider disabilities normally on the permanent side of things. There's also temporary and situational ones as well. I've tried to capture, maybe incorrectly, but I've tried to capture here different types of scenarios for the different senses. So Marie mentioned that there's a number of people with sight issues. So that's permanent potentially, but they might have a cataract that can be removed through an operation and therefore temporary. Or it might be that they've got a restricted view for some reason. So it's situational because they can move, they can change their situation and then be sighted again. Similarly with deaf people, that might be something that you live with, but you might have an infection that makes it harder or uncomfortable for you to hear. And similarly, if I'm a bartender and there's loud music going on all over the place, again, might make it harder for me to hear, but it's situational. So the point here tried to encapsulate the fact that, in quotes, disabilities can be permanent, temporary, or situational. And I think that's really important because it means that it's far more than 1 billion. 1 billion is already a massive number, but it's actually far greater than that. And therefore, providing for these permanent, temporary, and situational perspectives, we're able to cater for a far larger number of people and ultimately, have a larger set of people we can deliver our services for. And there are 4 key principles that we look to help define what we can do to make our products more accessible. And they're articulated here: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And I've got 10 tips in a minute to help implement some of these 4 things. But before I do, on the previous slide, sorry, Marie. So just to rattle through these, so perceivable. So it's all about, people being able to recognize and use your service that's available to them, so they can perceive the service itself. So operability is all about being able to find and use it regardless of how they choose to use it. So it might be on a screen reader that Marie mentioned before, it might be on a laptop, it might be with a mouse, it might be with a touchpad. Understandable. So the users are able to understand the content and understand how it works. So there's potentially some cognitive disabilities that we can cater for there. And making sure that it's robust. So can reliably interpret, or can be interpreted by a wide variety of user agents or browsers and devices and things like that. So assistive technologies. So if we're able to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, then the chances are that we're able to provide a more accessible service that more people can use and more people can enjoy engaging with. And we took a very similar approach to our website on the next slide to try and uplift the accessibility and consequentially the usability as well. So on the left hand side, we've got a screenshot of what the website used to look like. We did some accessibility testing on that and we found a number of areas that we could improve. We've now got the right hand side, which is live today. And this case study is what we can talk you through and share some of the tips that we've used to do that, and some of the things that you potentially can take away and use on a day-to-day basis when you're designing your products. And what I'd like to do is, once I rattle through these tips, is give you the opportunity to give me a URL of your website, and I'll test it for you right now on the call and we can see how well it does. I've got an example as well, and we'll see how that goes. We can use our website as well. So anyway, that's a little bit of an overview of accessibility and what we've tried to do with our products, with our website. And what I've got now is 10 top tips for you guys to take away and hopefully will help you improve your website's accessibility. Before I do that, I've got this disclaimer that you always have on these things. They're not comprehensive. There's way more than 10, but we don't want to be on a call for 24 hours listening to me rattle on about this stuff. So I've picked out 10. Hopefully they are stuff that you can action and relatively straightforward. So let's go through them, starting with testing. So anybody in the design space won't be surprised to see how important testing is. So there's this slogan of build, measure, learn. You build something, you measure its success, and then you learn from that success, and you use that feedback loop to build future iterations. But testing and testing again So it's no different here in designing accessible services and products, in that it's important to test with a variety of different users, with a variety of different requirements and technologies. So it could be with screen readers, and Marie mentioned before, it could be other assistive technologies, it could be things that speak to you, it could be things that are keyboard only. There's a whole variety of different scenarios that we can cater for, but it's about opening up those scenarios to cater for the more people that we want to use our service. So that's number one. Number two is, it's quite an important one, really. So there's a common phrase that a picture says 1,000 words, but if it does, that's potentially a thousand words that somebody who's blind is going to miss out on. 1,000 words, you can say an awful lot in 1,000 words, and that content, that content is lost if it's just a picture. And so what we need to do is we need to use visuals to supplement or complement our content rather than define it. And what this thing here is trying to identify is that if we do use visuals, then it's important that we use the correct contrast ratios. So what that means is that the difference in darkness and brightness between the foreground and the background is big enough that the majority of people are able to see it. It's the equivalent of putting green text on a yellow background. It might look ugly, but it's also really hard to read. Typically, we look for a ratio of 4:1, which means that the foreground is 4 times lighter than the background, or vice versa. So think about color contrasts with your visuals, but try to supplement visuals with content that can be read. So that's number 2. Number 3.
And I would just add also, think about this early when you design your brand. So make sure whoever is designing your brand has this standard in mind, because if you start off with the wrong color palette, you will have to make significant changes, in anything from your color palette to your logo as well. So yeah, think about this quite early and put it as a requirement for your brand designer.
Thank you. So number 3 is about PDFs. So PDFs have been around for a very long time, and they were created as a way for printers to understand what to print. It wasn't really built with the intention of being used as an online active medium. HTML was. And the advantage of HTML is that we can apply all sorts of metadata to that HTML, which we'll talk about in future tips. We can apply that metadata to the HTML, which can be interpreted by assistive technologies. PDFs are getting better, but it's still a lot harder to create a PDF that can be consumed by, for example, a screen reader. So by default, try to use HTML as the medium rather than PDFs as the way to share content. Number 4, building on from that. So one of the reasons why HTML is so powerful, particularly the current specification, is that we have a large variety of semantic markup. So what that means is that the sections that make up your page can have some context. So the thing at the top might be called a header. The thing underneath might be called a nav. You might have a sidebar within a side. You might have a footer, an article, a section, and there's a whole variety of different markup context that you could use, whether it's the roles or the attributes, or whether it's the element itself. And the reason why this is important is because screen readers and other assistive technologies are able to understand what this means, and therefore are able to focus in on what the content of the page is. Imagine having to have the header read out every single time you navigate around Wikipedia, for example, having to read out all that stuff on the menu, having the footer read out to you. It's not necessarily important. So giving the user the option to jump past all that stuff and go straight to the body of the page can be implemented by using a nice variety of semantic markup. So number 4, try to use the variety of semantic markup for HTML. Which brings us halfway to number 5, which is shortcuts. So again, extending from the previous tip, here we're able to provide a couple of menus as an example, skip to content and skip to menu. So that means that the user has an action, a call to action. The first thing that they see is an option to press this button and skip across the menu and the common elements of the page straight to the content. And you'll see this in good accessible sites. If you have the page in focus and the first thing you press is tab, hopefully this button will pop up. And if you tap it or press enter or click it, then it will jump straight to the body of the content and focus that, and jump over all the menus and submenus and mega menus or whatever else appears before the content. And it's the same with the menu as well. So having a shortcut to the menu. So here's an example of a button or a CTA that you can tap, and then that will expand or focus the menu. So repeatable content, give the user the option to skip over that stuff and go straight to the content. And you can do that through these actions and by having the semantic markup on the previous tip. Which brings us to number 6. So this is a nice one, keyboard navigation, supporting keyboard operation. So if you imagine doing some work on Word or something and you want to copy and paste something, I expect most people will do Control-C, Control-V, because it's quicker, it's more efficient. We don't go to click on File and then scroll down and press copy and do the same for paste. We choose to use a keyboard. And it might be that I've broken my hand and I can't use my mouse, and therefore I have to use my keyboard because of the situation or the temporary situation that I'm in. And it also goes for people who are unable to use a mouse, for example, or unable to use the standard technology that you expect, and a keyboard gives them that freedom and flexibility to navigate around the site. So this tip is all around trying to utilize and implement shortcuts and keyboard focused navigation so that you can tab around and interact with the entirety of the product using a keyboard only, giving people the option to use a mouse if they want to. So number 7 is about personalization. So here, as an example of personalization that can help with being more accessible, is to cater for different people who like to consume their content differently. So here's a little graphic that demonstrates themes. So it's becoming quite popular now, which is good, that you're able to sometimes toggle between a light theme and a dark theme. And there's certain characteristics that accompany different disabilities around sight, in that different levels of contrasts help them. There's some research that supports things for dyslexia and things like that. I think yellow is a better colour than white and things like this. So there's a range of different themes that you can apply, meaning that more people can use your service. And you know, switching a background from white to black is a relatively straightforward CSS change, so it's not difficult to implement, but you will be able to deliver a service that can be consumed by more people just by toggling on a particular theme. So that's number 7. Number 8 is about data entry. No, it's not data, it's about descriptive markup. So we talked a little bit earlier about semantic markup in terms of elements. So when we had headers and navigation and things like that. Here it's an extension of that where we're using attributes of those elements. So you know, for example, that an anchor tag, like a link, has a reference to the URL that you want that link to go to. Well, there are other such attributes with a prefix of ARIA. And the ARIA attributes give a little bit more context to assistive technology so that they understand a little bit more about what's happening in the state of the particular element. So a really simple example is a checkbox. Now, the majority of people will be able to look at a checkbox and see if there's a tick in it or not, and therefore know if it's checked or not. But if you can't see the checkbox, there's no way of knowing if it's ticked or not. But if you have this attribute that says ARIA checked, which can be true or false, then it's really clear from a descriptive technology perspective or assistive technology perspective, we're able to provide that level of detail to the user, and they're able to know if they've toggled this thing on or off. Same with if a button or some call to action has a pop-up, or associating a label with a field. There's lots of different ARIA attributes that you can use to add a little bit more data, a little bit more metadata and context to the elements that sit on the screen, and therefore give people the opportunity of having things explained to them a little bit more clearly. So ARIA attributes are really powerful and can make a big difference to the way that people consume the content. So this is number 8 and links nicely with number 9, which is about forms and data entry. So one of the ARIA labels that I spoke, so one of the ARIA attributes I spoke about was ARIA label. An ARIA label is used as a way to link a label to an input field, so that the user is really clearly be able to understand which label associates to which text box, and therefore knows which data to put into which text field. It's not just about which is the closest, because if it's being read to you, there's no understanding of which is close to which. So having that linkage is really important. But also, if you imagine that we've got many fields on a form, it's going to take a lot of time to enter. And if you're using some assistive technology, it's going to take a long time to fill. And therefore try to minimize the number of fields on your form, only ask information that you really need. It's, always consider if a field is optional and it's not necessary, then why add it in the first place? So think about the fields that you really need and the data that you need to capture. Maybe separate it over multiple pages in some sort of wizard. Try to keep things simple, particularly forms. So that's number 9, and number 10 is about more generally keeping it simple. So literacy is an important context. We haven't talked about this too much, but we've got cognitive disabilities as well. People understand things at different levels. So what's important is to try and keep the text, the content, the language and all these sorts of things as simple as you possibly can. Don't need someone to have a PhD in English or something. Try to keep it as simple as you can for the personas that you're providing for. So here's an example on the right hand side about reading levels, where you have beginners and skilled. And there's a reason why research papers are written with technical language. It's because the recipients or the readers of research papers are quite often your peers, and therefore that's appropriate. But you wouldn't use that same sort of language if you're talking to a child. It doesn't make sense. You'd have to adapt. So the same goes for our products as well. Try to keep it as simple as possible so that we can broaden the number of people that we can provide for. It's much easier for us to use more general language than vice versa. So try to keep your language simple. Try to keep your product simple. The simpler it is to use, the more likely it is that people will be able to complete the task that they're trying to achieve. So that's the tips. And just to summarize, you can see them here on the screen. Test, experiment, widen your personas that you can test with the technologies that they're using. Don't rely on visuals alone, and if you do, add that content that describes them. Try to avoid using PDFs as the primary form of content. Of course, by all means, we can add that as a downloadable form of a more dynamic web page, but try to avoid using them for their lack of navigable content. Semantic markup, we've talked about how important that is, and not just the markup itself, but the roles and the elements. Providing shortcuts to jump around the page, preventing people from having to go through the same stuff on every single page of your product or service. Keyboard navigation is particularly important, covering the permanent, temporary and situational perspectives. Personalization, we talked about themes as an example. Use descriptive markup. Keep forms simple, and indeed keep everything simple, and try to use language that is as simple as possible for people to consume. Right, we've done that now. Now we could do the fun bit. And what I am going to do now is I'll share my screen and I will do some live testing for however long we've got left and see how that goes. Thank you, Steve, for sharing yours. If anyone else has got a link, please go ahead. So I'm going to just share my screen. I'm going to start with an example. So this here is Domino's Pizza. So thank you, Gabby, for yours as well. So Domino's Pizza is an interesting case study because they were actually in court because they were being sued by somebody who was unable to order a pizza using a screen reader. And there's lots of legal, they describe it as boring legal stuff, but there's lots of legal articles and things about this particular case. But this is Domino's Pizza, big organization. And if they can make mistakes in this area, then it's incredibly simple for others to follow. But it's not if you start as you mean to go on. And I've done a test here, and Domino's Pizza now has 0 failed instances on the automated accessibility test that I've just ran. But I'm going to go with Steve's Cambridge 1 website. It looks quite nice, doesn't it? Yeah, it's very engaging. So I'm going to now run an accessibility test on that, and we'll see what comes up. 0 failed instances. So Steve, you can give yourself a pat on the back, and hopefully you're smiling away in the background at having 0 failed instances. But I'm not going to leave it there. I'm going to try and break it, see if I can find another page somewhere. We've got accessibility statements as well. That's pretty cool. I can't really find a menu or any other. Maybe I'll try and sign up. Let's try this page. Okay, so we've got four things here that we need to think about, Steve. So the first of which is color contrast. So if you can see here, this isn't a good example. This light grey here on this white is quite hard to see. Does it give me the color contrast ratio? It doesn't, but it's, oh, it does actually. It's got a contrast ratio of 1.18, and what we want to do is to uplift that to 4. So I know it's a disabled button, and I'm assuming if I click on one of these things, the button will change and then will fit presumably the purple primary color. But it extends here to these things here. They're obviously darker, which means that they haven't failed, which is good. But they failed for a different reason, which is that they are images that have no associated text. So if I'm a screen reader, if I'm taking the mindset of a screen reader, I'm looking at this picture and I don't really know how to explain that to my user. So we've got this alt text attribute or image alt that allows us to add a little bit of metadata to that image so that I can explain that as a screen reader to my user. It also helps that if I'm using a non-visual browser, like a Linux browser or something, then I wouldn't see an image, I would see the text. If the image is broken or it's not downloading or it's a massive image, it takes a while, then you'll see that placeholder in line as well. So there's lots of different scenarios where having an alt image will help, but it's pretty good going, I must say. Well done. Yeah, that's pleasing to see. Thanks, Steve. I'm afraid, Gabby, because Steve's done so well, sort of puts pressure on you, but let's see what happens. Oh, okay. Oh, I got English and Spanish as well. Cool. I must be in Spanish by default. Let's change it to English so I understand what's going on. Is it changing? There we go. Right. So I'll just close that thing there. Anyway, so again, quite nice. Looks modern. I've got a little video. Oh, video. That's an interesting thing. Let's see what comes up with the video. Yeah, looks nice. So let's do that again. And I must say, I'm using this thing, Accessibility Insights for the Web. It's just a plugin you can add on Chrome. there are lots of these sorts of things, and none of them are perfect. So I normally use 3 or 4 to get a nice set of all the issues. But I must also highlight that you can't really do all of this stuff on an automated plugin. If you remember, we had to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Understandable is really hard to test without using a human that needs to do the understanding. We can do some cheats, but it's really difficult to get that. And the same with perceivable as well. But nevertheless, it's a really good start. And let's go with this and see what we get here. (14), but it sounds quite high, but it's quite good actually, because you've got 11 that are really simple to fix. I'll talk about those in a second. But are you aware? So we've got 3 issues here. So one is on this accept button down here, yeah, which you can sort of see, sort of a yellowy on a white. You can see why that's failed. This blue might need to be darkened a little bit so that we've got a little bit more contrast with the white. That should be relatively easy to fix, although it might, let's have a look, it might interfere with your branding. I don't see that color really anywhere else except for here, so hopefully that won't impact you too much. Notice it didn't pull it out here because here we've got a dark background. So it might just be to have a little look at that. There we've got a contrast of 1.89. It needs to be lifted up to 4. We've got the same here, look, with this other link a bit lower down. Although this one's not bold, interestingly, and this one is. So maybe we should add some consistency there. And we got this button down here we talked about. That was 1.59, or the yellow on the white. But what might be quite nice is you change that button so that it's got your primary color, so you have the same blue throughout. But anyway, not bad going. Let me have a look at the others. So this link name, this is an interesting one. So let's see if we got that highlighted. Oh, okay, right. Hopefully just by this, you can see what this is calling out. So let me look at a good example here. Okay, this one here, yeah. The text is really small, particularly this text underneath, and maybe this one next to the EU flag that I used to enjoy seeing, but now I don't have the privilege of. So the reason is it's very unclear what this will do if I click on it, firstly, but also I don't really know what I'm clicking on. Here, Google for Startups is nice and clear, so you can sort of get away with that one. But this one here doesn't really have that. If you think about understandability again, is it understandable? What would happen if I click this? What this image is trying to provide? So obviously I'm collaborating with Google for Startups. I'm collaborating with something. But it's a really easy thing to fix. All we need to do is we need to add some metadata to the image so that the screen reader knows what this thing is. So in other words, you'd have a little attribute that would just have Dominion or whatever this thing says. So we just have a little attribute that just literally has that word. I'm interested now to see why that one wasn't called out. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong tab. Right. So here, look, you've got an alt, which is interesting. So you've got this thing, master study underscore placeholder. So this is a good example of why something passed. It's because it's got an alt tag, great, but it doesn't pass the understandable or the perceivable, because imagine having this read out to somebody, master study placeholder doesn't really describe what this image is. And presumably you have that in the other one that didn't fail down here somewhere. But it's a really good example, another good test, and I know it seems like you might have a good number more than Steve's one, but it's relatively simple to fix this one, adding alt tags. Most CMSs can sort that out by default. But yeah, it's really good. We did one of these webinars, I don't know how long it was, last year sometime, and the ones I tested had a lot more. So you guys are doing really well. Does anyone else want to have share a link? before we open it up for questions and answers? Maybe not. So if you do, then by all means just paste it into the chat. But why don't I stop speaking for a bit and see if anyone's got any questions or challenges or remarks or anything they want to share?
And you're very welcome to unmute yourself if you do have a question. Hey, Giovanna.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't have questions right now. I just opened my camera, so you can know.
That's okay. It's nice to see you.
And so maybe from Gabriella and Steve, who who were very bold and volunteered to put their website for scrutiny. Was that helpful? Were you already aware of those issues? And how do you envision to look after them?
Yeah, that was good actually, because when I first started here about a year ago, we had the DAC come in and have a look through our whole system, and it was, yeah, they pulled out a lot. And because we've got a team that work solely on the design system, making that accessible as well, that I'm going to take what you've said and feed back to them, because it's just, I think one thing I'm noticing is that there's an awful lot of awareness nowadays with accessibility, because it's got bigger and bigger. But there's things like this that just slip through the net sometimes, and I think having a tool like you've just shown, which I've now just downloaded, installed to Chrome, I'm going to use that as well. And because I learned to code last year as well, I understood the parts you were showing as well and how that works, the alt text and everything. So that's great. So yeah, I'm going to take that back into the design team and just say, do you know about this? And is it in the UX backlog to update? And yeah, so I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really cool. And there are other tools. I think we list them in our blog, Marie. We've got a list of different tools. Axe is another one. But what I think is also important is to test it with a screen reader user, Steve. So don't just rely on the tool, because the tool, like I said, you can put a placeholder in, and we think it passes because it's got some text, but we don't know that if it's describing the image or not. So it might be useful to do that.
Yeah, will do. Thank you.
And just by the way, just to make everyone feel even better, we did this on our website and we had far more issues that we needed to fix, which we fixed now, but we had some issues that we needed to fix. And yeah, it's about getting it started from the ground up. We're talking about your design system as well, Steve, which is important. And Marie mentioned marketing and the color palettes and things like this. So if you start as you mean to go on, it's relatively easy. Yeah.
And also, it's usually part of a virtuous circle of improvement. So it's more user friendly. It's easier to understand. It's better for SEO. I know there's some SEO people in the room. So it's not just. So if you have to build a business case for accessibility improvements, you can also use the sort of side benefits or co-benefits of improving the website accessibility.
Mm-hmm. And just before we finish, as a final top tip, as a treat for staying till the end, I'll just highlight that the what means accessible and what doesn't mean accessible is an evolving specification, and it's not set now forever. It's like I said, it evolves, and the standard today is 2.1, and very soon 2.2 is going to come out, which means that there'll be more rules that must be met in order for us to get green ticks and not red crosses on the test that we do. And just so I can explain a little bit about how this is becoming more and more intense. So one of the criterions now is around cognitive disabilities and supporting those. And one of the things that annoys people, including me, is all these passwords that you need to keep creating for all these different websites, then you forget them. And it makes it extra hard when they say you need to use 17 special characters and 14 of these, and you can't use this and you can't use that, and you end up writing down this thing that you can't remember. So anyway, what the the next draft is potentially going to introduce is a way for you to, or a mechanism to sign into a product without having to use a password. So you might have seen this 2FA thing that comes along, or this MFA, multi-factor authentication, where you can be sent a text message with a code and then you put that code into a box on the website and that logs you in. So these are some of the mechanics that we're going to need to implement in order to hit 2.2 that's coming out soon. And there are other things. Some elements have gone away because they're not relevant anymore. Some things have been promoted and relegated in terms of, or demoted in where they sit in the hierarchy. But more stuff will be coming out in 2.2. There'll be stuff that comes out in 2.3. There'll be stuff that comes out in version 3, and we'll keep evolving this thing to improve accessibility, but to also improve usability. So if you want to find out more, here's some things. We've got LinkedIn, we've got Twitter, we've got a website, and we've got my email address. And happy to continue chatting. Just get in touch.
All right, so if you don't have any more questions, we're going to wrap this up. It's all been recorded, and we'll be sharing the presentation as well, because there's a lot of details. So thank you for your time today. Our next webinar will be on user research. I'm just sharing a link, but I will send it to you guys as a follow-up email. So feel free to join if this is a topic of interest to you. So thank you for your time, and yeah, feel free to get in touch and ask any more questions if you have any. Thank you guys. Have a lovely rest of your day.